Coming out of World War II, the British Royal Navy recognized that they were going to need some carrier-borne long-range anti-ship strike capability, and that current propeller-driven aircraft just weren't going to be up to the task, as naval surface warfare threats were modernizing pretty quickly. Throughout the early 1950s, a number of studies and projects were done on how to proceed, and after some deliberation, the Blackburn Buccaneer, the Buck, was chosen as the new Fleet Air-Armed Jet Bomber in 1955. The early versions of the plane had some serious shortcomings, but nothing else was available, so the Buck was further refined and upgraded from the original S1 version into the S2. The Buccaneer S2 had new engines, slightly redesigned aerodynamics, upgraded electronics, and some minor changes to its internal structure, mostly to fit the larger engines. The S2 was generally considered successful at bringing the Buck up to what it should have been in its first production run, but it was still a difficult aircraft to operate out on the carriers. However, the Royal Air Force found a niche land-based role for the Buck after the F-111K fell through in the late 1960s. A small number of Buccaneer S2s were upgraded to the S.2B standard as a temporary solution to fill the need for a strike interdiction jet until a purpose-built option could be found. The RAF actually ended up operating the Buck for a bit over 20 years, with the S.2B standard being the most common. These jets had compatibility with the Martel air-to-surface missile, more modern versions of the Sidewinder air-to-air missile for self-defense, and some other minor alterations. RAF Bucks saw combat on a number of occasions, including the first Gulf War, before gradually being phased out and replaced by the Panavia Tornado. What we get in Warthunder is the Buccaneer S.2B, a strike aircraft and rank 7 of the British tech tree at battle rating 10.3. This jet gets a full ballistics computer for its air-to-ground weapons, along with the ARI 18223 radar warning receiver. This is a direction-based unit, but it tracks signal bands instead of threat types, which is actually a bit more useful than I expected it to be. Also, the Buck gets an optical bomb sight, which is still useful when you take the dumb bombs. Its radar is the ARI 5390. This is an I-band set with BVR targeting only, and no advanced search modes. However, it is one of the few radars in the game that gives you the C-scope display. For loadouts, the S.2B actually gets a fairly impressive selection of missiles, dumb bombs, rocket pods, and guided weapons, mounted on a combination of wing pylons and an internal bomb bay. The air-to-air missiles it carries are the AIM-9G and AIM-9L. The 9G is a medium-performance rear-aspect dogfight missile that isn't the best, but it's perfectly competitive in this BR range. The 9L is a highly capable 30G all-aspect weapon that lets the Buck defend itself quite effectively. You can also take the Mark 13 laser-guided bomb with the Pave Spike targeting pod. This is a fairly average laser-guided bomb, but its warhead isn't enormous, so you're going to need direct hits to pop main battle tanks rather than being able to rely on splash damage. New to the S.2B is the AJ-168. This is a TV-guided version of the Martel air-to-surface missile. On paper, it's got very long range, but in practice, it's impossible to accurately target lock anything out past 16 kilometers or so. Still, it's got a reasonably effective warhead, and it can pop tanks on a direct hit. In terms of its flight performance, I almost never say this, but this bomber actually doesn't feel underpowered. Without a heavy weapon load, it's almost transonic, and you can actually run into structural problems if you try and pull a snap turn at high speed. Try not to cruise above around 0.9 Mach in level flight, and make sure to slow down in a dive, as the Buck will fall apart right at Mach 1. Now, thanks to that engine power, the rate of climb and acceleration are both pretty good, but the usual disclaimers apply, that if you have a max weight payload of bombs and stuff, you're going to feel like you're driving a double-decker bus rather than piloting a strike jet. When it's not fully loaded, the Buck can also be surprisingly agile. Now, don't get the wrong idea, this isn't ever going to be a dogfighter, but the point is that it can usually pull off one or two good maneuvers before it runs out of energy, and it even gets combat flaps that you can deploy up to around 500 kilometers an hour. But just remember that despite having adequate engine power, this is a big lumbery whale with bad energy retention and only a marginal sustained turn rate. Don't forget that, and try not to allow yourself to get sucked into a turning dogfight. Almost everything in the Buck's BR range will dance all over it in a sustained maneuvering fight. One thing this plane has going for it though is the big chonky air brake on the back. Yeah, no way I was going to cover this plane without talking about the air brake. It's enormous and incredibly effective. You can slow down on full throttle by putting the air brake out, so it's possible you might find a situation or two where it saves your bacon by letting you hit the brakes for someone to overtake you, or just by managing your airspeed in a diving attack. It's ugly, but it works really well, so don't forget about it. Flying the S.2B out in air battles can often be pretty challenging, but in a fun way. As a bomber, this jet performs quite well and has enough of a bomb load to take out 2 bases or dozens of AI ground targets in one sortie, but the problem is its maximum speed, and most of the time your teammates are going to beat you out to the targets, so you'll usually be cleaning up leftovers. Normal bomber life. As a strike jet going for ground units, the dumb bombs are still your best bet. The Martel missile has good range, but you can only take a small quantity of them, and they're only going to get 1 target per shot. Plus, they're TV-guided weapons, which occasionally has drawbacks. In the clip you're watching right now, this Su-25 flew in front of my missile mid-flight, breaking the target lock and causing the missile to chase after the plane. Really bad luck for my shot. In terms of air combat, you've got countermeasures and a pair of all-aspect AIM-9Ls. Despite not being a good dogfighter, the Buck can still perform in air combat if you're careful with your positioning and you try to avoid traditional turning fights. It's worth noting that this plane is placed in a BR range where it can get down-tiered into opponents without flares, and it carries AIM-9Ls. So the S.2B is absolutely adding to the problem with BR compression. Flying close air support is a lot of fun. The laser-guided bombs and AJ-168 Martel missiles let the Buck make highly accurate targeted strikes, but if you're new to these type of weapons, just remember that they can take some time to impact the target. Sometimes, whatever you're attacking will get blown up by something else or move into cover or something, and despite being very accurate and having good safe range, not all of your shots are going to hit. That's normal. But still, both the laser-guided bombs and the TV-guided missiles are extremely effective in the close air support role. Visually, I'm sorry, this is just an awful-looking aircraft. It looks like a bowling pin with wings or something. The default desert paint job isn't really great to look at either, but the standard RAF camo is a bit better. Plus, that huge air brake on the back. I've just never liked the look of the Buccaneer, and in my opinion, it's a bit of an eyesore. Landing is pretty easy, as the combination of good engine power and an effective air brake let you manage the approach speed without much difficulty, and it uses a blown flap system which gives it a surprisingly low stall speed. You can drop gear and flaps safely a bit under 400 kilometers an hour. The cockpit has great details, but the visibility is poor and the back seater's the one with the radar display, and there isn't a HUD or anything, so it's not bad for a bomber, but in general, I didn't really care for the cockpit view. To close out on the Buccaneer S.2B. This jet has an enormous bomb load. It gets guided weapons for close air support. It gets all-aspect missiles. It has good engine power. And it's got an adequate supply of countermeasures. However, it still lumbers a bit in air combat. It's subsonic, and it's just plain ugly. The final verdict on the Buck S.2B is that this jet is highly effective at what it does, and with only a little practice, this can potentially be the best British ground pounder in its BR range. As always, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this review, check out this other one.